name is David Cohen. I was born in a little town called Brooklyn, New York. I went to school in Brooklyn, elementary school, junior high, and a high school in Queens. When I graduated when I was 16 years old, and I went to West Virginia for college. I went to the University of West Virginia, graduating in 1938. So long, it's almost ancient history, I have to think back. Graduated in 1938, came back to New York, struggled trying to find a job during the Depression, worked odds and ends, got a job making $12 a week and then $14 a week. And then finally, I went back to West Virginia. I worked in a furniture store, a friend of mine from the school. I had a good job in Princeton, West Virginia, which is near Bluefield. But when I was going to be drafted, I came home so I could be with my family, and I became engaged to a charming young lady from Providence, Rhode Island, whom I met in New York. She was at nursing school. And I tried to enlist in the Navy November 1941, before Pearl Harbor, but I was rejected because of astigmatism. And there was a man waiting for me. He said, "You could go right next door and sign up for the Army." I said, "No, thank you. I'll wait to be drafted." Well, in December, I had my physical, December 41, and I was taken in the Army, drafted in January 1942. I was sent to Camp Upton in Long Island. From there, I was shipped to Fort Knox, Kentucky. I was put in the Armored Force. I never knew why, but I guess that's the Army way. And I was assigned to the 4th Armored Division. When I went to Pine Camp, that's Camp Drum in Watertown, New York, we had a few inches of snow, 200 inches of snow. It was really a cold and wintry place. And we had our winter training because originally one of Churchill's idea was to invade through Norway. So we were trained for the cold climate. But from there I went back to Fort Knox, and they sent me to radio school, and I became a radio operator. I went back to my outfit. We went in maneuvers in Tennessee. From Tennessee, we were shipped to the Mojave Desert. Imagine being from the coldest climate in the country to the hottest. We went to Needles, California, Indio Needles, and we were there 7.5 months. I went to an advanced radio school at the University of Mississippi for 5 weeks. It was nice because my wife was able to come down and visit me. I was married while I was in the service, by the way. And from California, we went to the large state of Texas during the summer of 1943. And it was hot and miserable. They had new training, and it was awful. From Texas, oh, by the way, our wives were able to come down to Texas. And we stayed there 6 months. From Texas, we were shipped to Miles Standish in Massachusetts, and left from Boston Harbor to England, Wales, in fact. It was a horrible experience. Our ship broke down while we were in the harbor of Boston, and one of the engines broke down, and we were in that hole. I was 7 high in the hammocks, and you talk about being seasick. I wanted to die. I didn't want to go any further. Just let me die, bury me in Boston, we said. And fortunately, we just stayed there for 24 hours. They put a new motor in the ship, and the HMS, Rat Trap we called it. It was the SS Exchange, a converted freighter from World War I. And we picked up a convoy. It was a tremendous convoy. The sailor told us it was the largest convoy that he ever was in. And we picked up the convoy, and it took us 14 days to get to Cardiff, Wales. In Cardiff, Wales, we were put in trucks naturally and brought to our camp in England, near Bath, Bristol area. In fact, it was Trowbridge was the name of the place. And I was with the same outfit, the 4th Armored Division. We did our training in England, near where was, I guess it was May, before before the invasion in Europe. General Patton came to visit our division, and he told us that we were going to be in his 3rd Army. And or some of the language he used, I couldn't even tell a Marine drill sergeant. I'd embarrass him. But anyway, from England, we went to Plymouth. Well, we were in Plymouth, England. We embarked on LSTs, a landing ship tanks, and we went to France. That was D-36. The beachhead had already been established, and we were put in the hedgerows. We replaced the 4th Infantry Division because they had to have a rest period. They were torn to shreds during the invasion. And we stayed a few days until we landed July 14th, and July 26th was the breakthrough at St. Lo. And we went all through France as fast as a tank and truck would take us. Patton really was gung-ho, and we did a good job going through France. And we got to the Siegfried Line, and we were stopped I remember in October because of the rain, and we ran out of gas. The English needed the gas at the Holland. Well, anyway, we got through into Germany in a place called Bitburg. We crossed the Rhine River just with an artillery barrage. The British were near us, and they had all kinds of Navy boats. They had fog. They had everything. Montgomery really made a real Hollywood production of crossing the Rhine. We crossed the Rhine just early in the morning. I remember when we crossed, 2 planes came over and strafed the place, and they were going so fast we couldn't possibly see them. They were the first jets. The Germans had a few jets, and they used them at the Rhine River, the crossing. They weren't effective, evidently. Our ACAC chased them off. But we crossed the Rhine, we went through Germany, and in December, we got orders to, just before Christmas of 1944, we had orders to move out, to paint all the vehicles with white so that our identification would be covered. We had to take our patches off our shirts and jackets, and we had radio silence for a while. And as we're going up to Belgium, we were going to a place called Bastogne, they told us. And as we were going up to Belgium, we had radio silence, but we would put the radio on to listen to good music. Radio Berlin had excellent music. Here, Axis Sally was talking about the Jewish people back home were taking all the good jobs and making all the money, and then she'd play Benny Goodman playing a George Gershwin number. So it was kind of ironic to listen. And as we're going up, she says, 4th Armored Division, we know you're on your way. You're outside of Longwy, Belgium. She knew where we were. We had radio silence, supposed to be quiet. And there were just German planes came out. And as we were going up Christmas, it was December 25th, I remember, when the sun came out. It was like a good omen. And the American planes came out. Well, anyway, we stayed in Belgium. It wasn't pleasant. I guess we had good training in Watertown, New York. It was cold and we were accustomed to the snow, more or less. But it was horrible. Our division relieved the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne. We had about 2 or 3 soldiers receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. We were given the Presidential Unit Citation by President Roosevelt. Well, after the Bulge, we had our real first rest period. We were sent down in late January 45 rather, to Luxembourg. Met nice people in Luxembourg. That was our rest period. And then from Luxembourg, we went into Germany, and we went very rapid. We could see the war was coming to an end. And in April 5th, 45, we got a radio message that one of our infantry battalion was to go into a place that there was a communication center and take it over. Well, they radioed back to all the units that it wasn't a communication center, it was a concentration camp. And we went into the camp, and now we'd gone through combat, horrible, everything, but there was nothing like it. It was the most horrific experience. The soldiers went through, we were all dumbfounded. As we got into the camp, it was called Ohrdruf, outside of Gotha, near Gotha, G-O-T-H-A, Germany, Ohrdruf. And as we walked into the camp, there were about 50 bodies laying on the ground. They were clubbed to death or shot in the back. Rather than let them live, the Germans killed them, machine gunned them, clubbed them to death, and they took some of the living ones to another camp rather than let them be liberated. But they didn't take all of them. There were so many left behind, and we spoke to them. There were very few Jewish inmates in the camp. Most were Russian, Polish. There were French, Greeks, Yugoslavs. He didn't discriminate. He took them from all over the country. I guess that was Hitler's diversity. He took them from all over. And it was just awful seeing the body. We took pictures, and we went back to our outfit, and a few days later, there was a directive from Eisenhower that he wanted all the available troops to see the concentration camps. And we went back again, and when we went back, Eisenhower came in with General Bradley and General Patton, and Patton came in and he saw the bodies piled up like it was a butcher slaughterhouse. And he went into this room where the bodies were, and he threw up. He actually threw up. And naturally he started cursing at the top of his voice. And we couldn't do much, you know. We just walked around, and one of our doctors, a Dr. Scotty from Brooklyn, he lost himself. He started to scream. He said, now I know how the Germans found the cure for malaria and typhus. They gas them people and kill them and shoot them. And I guess that was the truth. Well, from there, we left. Like I said, it was close to about April the 10th, 9th or 10th, and we went towards Weimar, Jena, Germany, Jena, and we went into another camp. The 6th Armored Division was in there just before us, and this was a real major league camp. It was called Buchenwald, and there were not just hundreds of bodies, there were thousands and thousands of bodies, and it was awful. We went in, the survivors kissed our hand, our feet, and they asked us for food, and we couldn't give them food, so what we did mainly was just give them cigarettes. I gave them my cigarettes. I didn't smoke. I gave them our chocolate. We called it jungle chocolate. It was hard as rock. And I gave them crackers, because the British had liberated, I think, Bergen-Belsen, and gave the survivors food. And they ate it so fast and gulped it down that it actually killed them. Their stomachs had shrunk, and their stomachs exploded. Many of them died. So we were told not to feed them. But it was an awful experience to go in and see the bodies piled up like cordon wood, and the bodies laying all over in Buchenwald. And we took pictures. I have a friend, a Czech Catholic from outside of Philadelphia. He was an amateur photographer, so he developed them. We had taken some German photographic equipment, some of the loot that soldiers pick up. And we developed the pictures, and I brought them home with me. Well, I was discharged I wasn't the first, let me get back. I was stationed in the Regensburg area for a few months. The war was over when May, we were there. We ended up in Czechoslovakia. And I want to tell you how nice the Czechoslovakian people were. We were in this little town in Czechoslovakia, and we were going to leave, and they knew we were leaving to go to Germany to occupy the area. And as we got up about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, we got out, all the tanks, trucks, half-tracks, vehicles were covered with roses, thousands of roses. That was their way of thanking us for the liberation. And we went to Germany. I was stationed on the Rhine River outside of Regensburg, and we were there from, I guess, July, August. The only good thing I got a pass to go to Paris. I was there 5 days, and I swam in the Danube River, and it was muddy. So I asked one of the women, I said, how come Strauss wrote the Blaue Danube? That means the blue Danube. I said, look how muddy, it's brown. She says, oh, he was drunk when he wrote the blue Danube. Well, anyway, we were stationed there. We had a good USO show, by the way, one time. We had Beatrice Lilly, and this one night, our battalion invited Jack Benny, Larry Adler, Martha Tilton, who sang with Benny Goodman's orchestra. Larry Adler was a famous harmonica player, and Ingrid Bergman. That was a real terrific show, and we invited them to eat with us. And Ingrid Bergman and Larry Adler ate with the enlisted men. Jack Benny and Martha Tilton ate with the officers. And we showed Ingrid Bergman the pictures of the concentration camps, and she broke down and cried like a baby. And this was the most beautiful woman, with apologies to my wife, by the way, the most beautiful woman I met. She had no makeup, just plain, simple beauty. And she was a wonderful person. You could see just plain talking to Ingrid Bergman, and an excellent actress, by the way. Well, anyway, we stayed there in the Regensburg area until late September, when they gathered points. In other words, soldiers, you had any medals you had. We had 5 combat stars, so we had 5 points for each combat star, 1 point for each month in the Army, and another point for each month overseas. Any medals you had, and some of the boys had children. For every child you had 14 points. And I had well over 80 points, close to about 90 points. So I had enough to go home. Now, some were sent to one outfit, and I was transferred to another outfit. And we went just the end of September, it was the beginning of October, 45. We went to Marienbad, Czechoslovakia. Beautiful, a resort. And the first night we were there, I have to tell you this story because I want to tell you, I tell this story to so many people and they're fascinated by it. I went to a USO show. It was a Hungarian circus. When I got out, it was dark, and all the hotels looked alike to me. So I see a young kid in an American GI uniform, and I go over to him. I said, "Sprachen Sie Deutsch?" And he looks at my Brooklyn face, and he says, "Ich red Yiddish echet." That means I speak Jewish too. I start talking to the kid. He told me he was 16 years old. He survived the camps. And he told me a little more. And I met him the next day, had him over for lunch. And he started telling me the story. He was 12 and a half years old when the Nazis came into his little village in Poland. And they took all the Jews out. And he saw his mother and sister raped. They took his mother, father, 3 sisters, and 2 brothers. And naturally took him. He was taken to the concentration camps. He floated around. He found out, he was with his father for a while, I believe. He found out his mother, father, and his 3 sisters and 2 brothers were all killed. Now this is a kid, he was 12 and a half when he was taken. He said he knocked around, but he was a husky kid, he was, I guess, shrewd and wily, you know. He was able to survive that way. And he told me how he became friendly to the German soldiers, because a lot of them were just plain people. The SS were just natural SOBs. They were killers. You never even looked at an SS. But he spoke to a German soldier, took pity on him. They had some compassion. He would get a little extra food, maybe a piece of bread, a little extra potato soup, who knows. And he was able to survive. One time he was shot in the leg. He told me he dug the little bullet out with a spoon. Another time he said something or did something, the SS guard hit him with the butt of a rifle and just broke the bone in his cheekbone. And he had fever, but he was able to survive these things. And late in 45, the war was almost over. He heard that, from I guess one of the soldiers told him that they were taking the survivors and going to move them into a camp where there was a gas chamber. And they were going to gas them. So his name was Izzy. Izzy was shrewd, so he told another kid, he says, "Hey, look, we're not going to just put in the train and go to a camp to be gassed." He says, "We'll go in the train." He says, "There's a little window in each car, and if you go to Washington, D.C., in the Holocaust Museum, you see this window. You'd say, how could a kid even crawl through it?" But remember, they were in camp. He was in camp, 4 years. He was in camp almost 4 years, 3.5 years. And he lost all the weight. He could crawl through a little space. And he told his friend, Morty, he met him just then, he called him his cousin. He says, "We're going to jump the train." He says, "When we go around the bend, we'll crawl through the window, jump into a ditch." He says, "If we go around around the bend, the guard on top won't be able to see us so well." So that's what they did. They jumped out of the window. They were picked up by a German farmer. They stayed with him a while. And then they wandered around. They were picked up by an American field artillery unit. And there were 2 Jewish kids in there 2 Jewish soldiers that took a liking to him and started talking and said, "Why don't you stay with us? The war's almost over." And they told him his story, of course. And Izzy told me that he met an officer, I think he was a general, who said he could smuggle him into Palestine. That he could, if he get down to Marseille, he could smuggle him into Palestine. So Izzy asked me, where should he go? To America, where these two Jewish soldiers said their father would sign for him and get him a job in America, or should he go to Palestine? It wasn't Israel yet. I said, if I were you, Izzy, I'd go to Palestine. Well, anyway, I gave him my Brooklyn address, and it ended up he came to Massachusetts and worked in the butcher's shop of the father of one of the soldiers that picked him up. And he called me up, wrote me a letter, and he told me he wasn't happy in Massachusetts. He was paranoid. If he heard the word Jew, he was ready to fight. Guys could have said the Jews are the best people in the world, but he heard Jew, he was ready to fight. And he came to New York. He worked as a painter's apprentice, he said. And he called me up, and I went to the Bronx from Brooklyn, a miserable trip by subway, by the way. Didn't have a car. And I brought him over to my mother's house, and he had a good Jewish Friday night chicken meal with chicken soup and all. And we talked, and he said he didn't like New York. He said he had fights there. They made fun of him reading the Jewish paper. Who knows what it was. But anyway, Izzy was getting his strength back, and he said, I'm going back to Massachusetts. So he went back to Massachusetts to work in this kosher butcher store, and I wrote to him or called him once or twice, I remember, but then for some reason I lost his address and the phone number. And Izzy, on the other hand, must have lost mine, because we lost track of each other. I was afraid maybe he went to Israel, got killed in the army, you know. And this was like 1949. From 1949 up until the present date, about 9 years ago, I went to Alaska. And a woman from Springfield, Massachusetts, says, you know, you and your friend Donald Goslin do wonderful things going around to the schools speaking to the children about the Holocaust. She says, my brother and his friend picked up 2 survivors and brought them to America. She told me a little bit. I told her the story about Izzy. And she said, well, his name isn't Izzy, it's Billy Weir. So I said, well, maybe he changed his name, Americanized it. She says, maybe. She gave me his address. I wrote him a long letter describing what I just told you, you know, that I met this individual and came to America. Well, sure enough, I came home one night about 8:30. My wife says to me, my God, we got a call from Izzy and his wife. They were crying on the phone. They finally met up with a cousin, their relative. I was no cousin, of course, but he had nobody else. And I called him back, and he was so happy to hear. And my grandson graduated high school here in Longmeadow, Mass., and I had a party, so I invited Izzy. He came down. Oh, it was so good to see him. He's husky, he's not very tall, but he's well built, and he's a real American. He belongs to the Rotary Club. He plays golf. He goes to Las Vegas and gambles, and he's Americanized. I'm married with 3 children. Unfortunately, now he came down with the dreaded cancer. But when I called him, I says, Izzy, you got to fight this thing. He says, look, David, he says, the Nazis didn't get me. I'm not going to let this cancer get me. And we became real friends. He lives up in Foxborough, Massachusetts. And from Quincy, he moved to Foxborough, and I'm going to go next week to see him. And I ended up a little happy story. And there's more to it. He had put his name on the internet, and he found out there was a name. His name was, I think, Wisnowski in Poland. Now it's Billy Weir, Americanized. And this fellow in Australia was no relative. But about 4 or 5 years ago, about 1997, 98, he gets a call from Antwerp, Belgium. This young fellow says, "I'm a cousin of yours." Well, the story goes, Izzy's mother had a brother in Antwerp, Belgium. When the Nazis came into Antwerp, they took all the Jews. They took Izzy's, I guess that was his uncle, and his wife, and they took him to Auschwitz, and they never survived. But they left a 3-year-old girl. They had one child, 3-year-old girl, and they put her in the convent. And she was brought up a Catholic from 3 years old. She didn't know what her background or anything. She was never told. She got married as a Catholic, had 3 children. One of her sons was an engineer, and he wanted to know about his family background, I guess curious, Well, and he checked into, he found out would be his grandfather, right? His grandfather's name and his family's name, who he had in Poland, and he found Wisnowski, and sure enough, he saw Izzy's name on there from this town, and where his grandfather came from in Poland, and he called Izzy up. And in fact, he came to America, became close to Izzy again. Izzy went to Antwerp to this cousin's marriage, who this cousin converted back to Judaism. So his sister and brother are still Catholics, but he went back, he reverted back to his Judaism. Married a Belgian Jewish girl, and Izzy has a relative in Belgium now, story. Very interesting story. By the way, when I was discharged in 1945, I still remember the date, October 23rd, 1945. I was married, couldn't find an apartment, so we lived with my mother in a house and my father and sister in Brooklyn. And I got a job in a furniture store, a furniture showroom. And I'm not cut out for business. So I went back to college later on after so many years, get my master's degree. And I became a social studies teacher in junior high in Queens, New York. Taught so many years there. Had 2 children, 2 girls. Both went to college. Both became teachers. I don't know if I did the right thing, but they both became teachers. I moved from New York. I had a house. I used to go up to a place in the Catskill Mountains, and I had 2.5 acres of land. I had a house built, and I moved up in the wilderness in Livingston Manor, New York. And I stayed there. We were there 7.5 years until my wife became ill, and my daughter, who had moved to Springfield, Massachusetts to teach in the system, and she got married and got 3 children too. And she says, "You have to move to Springfield." So we moved to Springfield, Massachusetts in 1984, and we're happy to be here. And one day I met a young, not so young, but I met a fellow who was in the Army in a field artillery unit, who liberated Nordhausen concentration camp. It was called, I forget now. Yeah, the memory goes real fast. But anyway, it was Nordhausen concentration camp. And he took pictures. And there was a local rabbi knew him and introduced him to me one night. And we both had slides made from our pictures, and we start going around to schools showing the kids the pictures of the concentration camps, explaining not just about the camp, but what hate can do. And our main theme, our purpose was to go around and speak to children so we could try to eliminate the prejudice and hate that's that's right in our society and every society in the world. And we did a good job. We spoke to tens and tens of thousands of students in all schools from elementary right through college. Unfortunately, his name was Donald Goslin. Unfortunately, he died of multiple myeloma, or cancer, 2 years ago. And I go around the schools by myself, but I'm kind of slowed down. I'm 85, so I'm more selective where I go. But I still speak to children, any group that wants to listen. I still have the pictures and the slides. And I hope someday, we could I guess you never eliminate prejudice or hate, but you minimize it so it's of no danger to the world, so that things like the genocide, Holocaust won't happen again, that we can get rid of guys like Saddam Hussein and all the tyrants and dictators and hate mongers in the world. And all I can say is thanks for everything, and amen.